Hello, my name is Mac Kerfman. Let me tell you a little story about a baseball player. He was in the minor leagues and he had been doing well for some time, but all of a sudden he got himself into a slump, a batting slump. He had been striking out and he was at the plate again, and he went down swinging in 3 pitches. And he went to the bench. He was dejected. He threw the bat. And the coach came up to him, and the coach was just livid. The coach was very upset with him. He yelled at him. He screamed at him. He said, "That's it. I'm putting you on the bench. In fact, tomorrow morning, I'm trading you." And, of course, the player, his name was Joe, by the way. Joe was very dejected. And, of course, the next morning, he was, in fact, traded to another team. Got to that other team, met the coach of that team, and said, "Hey, and I know you're in a bit of a slump right now, but I see your stats, and they've been good stats. You've been a good player. We'll be able to get you out of this slump. So I'll tell you what, let's get you up to bat, and then we can diagnose you. We can diagnose what's going on in your swing." So, of course, Joe gets up to the plate. And in fact, he does strike out 3 pitches, and he's back in the dugout again, feeling very dejected. And the coach comes up to him. He runs up to him kind of all excited. And he says, "I can fix you. I know exactly what's wrong. I can fix you." So in fact, the next morning, he says to meet him the next morning in the dugout. And he does. The next morning, he goes to the dugout, and the coach comes up to him with a big pad of paper. And he says, "Okay, here are all the things that I found wrong in your swing. Now, where's your pad of paper? You're supposed to take notes. We got to fix this problem. You need to get a pad of paper." So he trotted off, of course, to get a pad of paper, and then the coach proceeded to, for about 2 hours, rattle off all the things that was wrong with Joe's swing, his stance, the way he held the bat, his elbow, the width of his stance, the timing of his swing, everything. Every little detail was scrutinized and had a solution ready to go. And all Joe had to do was implement the solution according to the coach. Well, of course, Joe gets up to bat, and he swings, and more than 3 pitches, but he does, in fact, strike out again. Twice more, in fact, in that game. So he struck out 3 times. At bat 3 times, struck out 3 times. And the coach says, "Okay, well, Rome wasn't built in a day, so we'll give it a little bit of time." So for a week, Joe's with that team and works on all the things the coach has told him to work on, and he just gets more and more and more frustrated because it's not improving his batting. He continues to be in the slump. He continues to strike out. And at the end of the week, the coach comes up to him and says, "Look, I've done my part. I've given you the solutions, but you failed to do your part. You failed to improve. So I got to cut you. I'm going to trade you to another team." So once again, Joe is dejected. And in fact, the next day he is traded to a new team. So gets to the new team, and the coach comes up to him and says, "Hey, Joe, really nice to meet you. I was pretty excited to see that you were not with another team at this point." And Joe kind of looks at him and says, "Excuse me?" He says, "Yeah, I've been watching you. I've been watching your career, and we're really waiting for an opportunity to get you onto our team because I think you would fit in our team very nicely. We haven't had an opportunity to do that up until this point, but our kind of where we are and where you are now kind of fitting very nicely together." And Joe said, "Well, you are aware, right, that I'm in a bit of a slump right now." So the coach says, "Yeah, you know what? We'll deal with that. Don't worry about it." So the coach says, "Okay, well, let's get you right in." So he puts him right into the game, and Joe, gets up to the plate and in fact does strike out. And Joe's expecting the worst. Here comes the coach. Joe's expecting the worst. But again, the coach says, look, Joe, you've been in this slump for a while. It's not going to be solved overnight. So tell you what, do you like to eat breakfast? And Joe says, sure. Says, okay. Now, I eat breakfast pretty early in the morning, about 6 a.m. So do you mind meeting me at 6 a.m.? Do you know see that diner across the street from the stadium? Would you mind meeting me there at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning? We'll have a good breakfast. And Joe says, yeah, of course. So they do. Joe walks in the next morning. The coach is sitting there ready to go. He's got a cup of coffee in front of him. Joe sits down and says, hey, so what do you like to eat? And Joe looks at the menu for a few minutes and places an order. And he expects to get right down to it. In fact, he brought his notebook. He brought a notebook with him. And the coach says, what is that? It's a notebook. I want to take some notes because I know you're going to have some solutions. You saw me bat yesterday. I know you're going to pick my swing apart. And the coach says, no, we're not. And Joe says, what do you mean? It's like, yeah, we'll get to that issue. I mean, it's not a big deal. I just want to learn a little bit about you. So tell me a little bit about yourself. I mean, where are you from? What's your family life? And the coach basically proceeds to ask him about his life outside of baseball. Talks to him a bit about his family, and then talks to him a bit about what he sees as his future. Where does he want to go? Does he want to go to the bigs? I mean, what's his goals? What are you after in life? I mean, even if you get to the bigs, what's your goals after that? So they sit there for 2 hours, eating their breakfast and just having a great conversation. And Joe's really enthused because he's finally met a coach that really kind of wants to know him for who he is, not as an asset for the team, but for who he is. So Joe and the coach are there for 2 hours, and the coach finally says, you know what, it's about 8 o'clock. Let's head on over to the stadium, and let's just do a little batting practice. And Joe says, okay, great. So they cross the street, go over to the stadium, and the coach gets on the mound. The coach, Joe didn't expect this. Joe thought he was going to get a pitcher, and they would do batting practice with the pitcher, or again an automated ball pitcher. But no, the coach got on the mound himself, and the coach just started throwing, and Joe, started batting, getting his batting practice in. He just started swinging, and some he hit, some he didn't hit, of course, and we kept practicing. Now, the coach didn't say anything. The coach didn't say, okay, well, lift that elbow up. The coach didn't say, widen the stance out. He didn't say anything. And Joe's getting a little bit concerned at this point. I don't know what's going on. I thought the coach was going to help me here. But instead, all he's just doing is pitching. In fact, the coach pitched to him for 2 hours. 2 solid hours. At the end of the 2 hours, the coach said, okay, let's go into the dugout for a little bit. Let's get a drink of water. Let's kind of rest for a little bit. And once again, Joe's expecting, okay, here's what your problem is. But the coach doesn't do that. The coach begins to ask more questions to Joe. So, tell me a little bit about how it feels like, how that bat feels like in your hand. And tell me about that bat in your hand today, that bat in your hand today versus a year ago. What's the difference? Or tell me a little bit about when you do get a hit. What does that feel like for you? What does it do for you? Tell me about your stance. How has it changed over the past several years? Tell me about the way you hold the bat. Tell me about your elbow. Tell me. And he just had a conversation once again, have a conversation. So they spent 2 hours having a conversation at breakfast, 2 hours pitching, and again, 2 hours in the dugout, just talking. At the end of that 2 hours, the coach stood up. Joe stood up, of course. And the coach says, okay, I'll see you tomorrow. And Joe says, well, what do you mean? You didn't tell me to fix anything. No, I'm not going to tell you to fix something. All I'm trying to do is to help you get to the next step. My job as a coach is to help you get to that next step, to try to figure it out. Now, my job isn't to prescribe things. Do this, do that, don't do this. That's not the job of a coach. The job of a coach is, number one, to instill confidence in that person. Number two, to make sure they have all the tools, all the wares in which they have, the wares that's necessary for them to complete their jobs. Third, the third job of a coach, and the most important part of being a coach, is to kind of get inside of that person's head and help them think. Help them think through the issues, help them think through the problems, and to be able to come to resolutions on their own. Coaching isn't a prescriptive process. That's consulting. Coaching is about a one-on-one relationship, building that relationship up so that that person that's being coached is held up and is bolstered and is, in fact, served by that coach. Joe went on to win batting that next year, not that year, but the following year. He went on to win a batting title and was a very prominent player in the minors. Never made it to the bigs, but he credited that coach for his continued success. Thanks for listening.